Please join me in a prayer of the nation. God, Almighty, quiet our souls and open our hearts, that by your Holy Spirit we might not only hear your word to us this day, but believe it. And in believing, be sure of all that is still possible with us and through us by the power of your amazing grace. In Jesus' name, amen. A reading from the Hebrew Scriptures. Hear the word of the Lord. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and his inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them like a tent to live in, who brings princes to naught, and makes the rulers of the earth as nothing. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely are they sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows upon them, and they are withered, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me, and who is my equal? Says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes on high and see, who created these? He who brings out their host and numbers them, calling them all by name, because he is great in strength, mighty in power. No one is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He is not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up upon the wings of eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Mark, the first chapter, beginning with the 29th verse. Listen to what the Spirit is saying to the family of faith this day. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." Jesus answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. This is the word of the Lord. Apparently, there are people who, even though they don't feel well, are sick, have a fever, and are going through a box of Kleenex every 4 hours, still think they should go into work. I am not one of those people. I honestly don't feel guilty about spending a day resting on the sofa, wrapped in a warm blanket with a bowl of chicken soup, watching Ellen, while not spreading my germs around to an unsuspecting public. Sure, for a cough and stuffy nose, I will take some medicine and still come in and bother Katie and Alita in the office. I would probably not do any visitation, but that is just common cold type symptoms. I'm talking the kind of illness, the flu, that seems to be currently knocking out person after person, including our organist, Jen. The Center for Disease Control currently has Minnesota listed as experiencing a widespread flu outbreak. Reports of the illness in schools are much higher than usual, and patient visits to clinics and urgent care facilities are way up. So what about the 65,000 people, many from out of town, who are here for the Super Bowl, which I understand might be today? Event organizers and health officials have been urging any Super Bowl travelers to get a flu shot in advance of the big game, as well as telling attendees that they should wash their hands as often as possible and not rely on hand sanitizer alone to keep them healthy. Amazing. Only Minnesotans could figure out such an elaborately passive-aggressive plan to get even with Philadelphia Eagles fans. So far, our home has been spared the flu this season, fingers crossed, which, let me be clear, is no preventative to not getting it. Even those aforementioned crossed fingers have been soaking in Purell. But if I did come down with the flu, I'm telling you right now, and the Personnel Committee, that I would have no problem staying home, and that I would endure my suffering fairly quietly and patiently, though you can check with Lisa later. This as opposed to what has been referred to as the man flu, the now documented perception that men tend to exaggerate their suffering and seem to whine about being sick far more than women do. So what does actual science have to say about the man flu? Well, Dr. Kyle Sue, a family medicine professor at Memorial University of Newfoundland in Canada, recently published findings from his extensive research which concluded that men may not be exaggerating their symptoms, but instead truly do have weaker immune responses than women. The studies and surveys included in his research show that men with influenza are more likely than women with influenza to need hospitalization or even die, and that women tend to be more responsive to flu vaccines than men. Some studies, he adds, have actually suggested that testosterone may suppress the immune system, pointing to a potential evolutionary basis for man flu. Meaning, if you follow that logic, which I'm guessing most of us here with 2 X chromosomes are not, man flu could even be a defense mechanism keeping weakened men laid up and away from predators and competitors during the recovery process. You cannot make this stuff up. That's just fine, you might say, for all that fake science. But what does the objectively factual Bible have to say about man flu? Do the scriptures portray any kind of gender difference when it comes to our ability to bear illness or in our recovery from illness? Well, when Lazarus is raised from the dead, as extreme as illness gets, he is later found reclining around the table with Jesus while his sister Martha serves them dinner. In this morning's passage, Simon's mother-in-law is in bed with a fever, and simply by his touch, Jesus lifts her up and her fever leaves her, at which point, healed and restored to health, she serves them. What? She's healed so that she can serve? Whom did she want to? That's all she can do? Didn't she have any other aspirations? If you are brought back from the edge, from almost death, or from the brink of what you thought your life had to be, shouldn't there be something else for you? Some sort of new vocation, new career, new identity? And she served them? As if that was what she was expected to do? As if that was the only thing she thought she could do? As if that was the only thing she could do? Yes, there seems to be a difference, at least in these 2 instances. Now granted, one probably recovers from death a whole lot slower than a fever. But still, restored to health, one of these people, the man, is served. And the other person, the woman, does the serving. None of which really answers the question as to what God's Word has to say about man flu, but it does raise other questions. Does the Bible teach us that God desires women to serve and men to be served? Or more likely, are these women being lifted up as examples of how all of us should respond to God's healing in our lives and the lives of our loved ones? While the male-dominated church has potentially used them to perpetuate the former, the subservience of women to men, and to be clear, an idea totally antithetical to the life, ministry, and teaching of Jesus, I want to suggest that it is actually the latter that is being divinely communicated to us. That the healing of Simon's mother-in-law is not about the inequality of gender roles, but is about bringing her back to be the person she always was, and that she has always been called to become. About how divine healing restores us to ourselves, those original good and beautiful selves created by God, and calls us to be agents of amazing grace to a broken world. And so in being brought back to who she was, she has not become merely a cook and a waitress to men, but she is becoming a disciple of God, called to minister, to serve, like the angels did for Jesus in the wilderness, and like the Son of Man, who did not come to be served, but to serve. And so we are. Have you experienced God's healing presence, healing touch in your life? Felt that God has brought you back from the brink, physically, emotionally, or spiritually, and restored you to yourself? That you were called back from a place that was not fully you, to be you, who God created you to be, who God desires you to become? What if resurrection is being raised up to be who you always were and always meant to be? That it won't be mansions of glory along streets paved in gold behind pearly gates, ostensibly to keep those people who aren't as good or divinely loved as we are out, but is instead the radical, emotional, incredible feeling of being you. That being raised up is not just some sort of spiritual future, but your present reality, here and now, to live you. Your mind, spirit, body, everything together, everything that you were always meant to be. The story of Simon's mother-in-law tells us that God does not call us to be something we are not, but that God is in the business of restoring us to who we really are and who we are called to be, called to serve, to be ministers of God's healing and restoring grace. Of course, if we are honest with ourselves, most of the time it's easier to live behind the masks, the personas we have created for ourselves or have thrust upon us, silently enduring our uniquely personal suffering, surrounding ourselves with people and projects and performances that allow us to pretend this is who we are, that lets us avoid the feelings and frustrations and fears that come with acknowledging our woundedness, our vulnerability, our brokenness, our need for healing. It is so hard to live who we truly are, who God has created us to be and become, because we spend so much time and energy, because we are so exhausted from trying to be who we think others will like more, who the world will deem more successful than who we actually are. And who we are is not only a unique child of God, but one of God's beautiful and beloved children, a part of the whole creation, brothers and sisters, and who we are is called to serve, to care for, to heal one another as God has healed and continues to heal us, to restore one another as God has restored and continues to restore us. Salvation is so much more than about my healing and wholeness. It is about our healing and wholeness. And until we are all whole, none of us are truly whole. We are healed to serve. We are healed to heal others. How many times have I seen people in this congregation who have experienced healing of a multitude of varieties in their lives, or are even in the process of still healing from some suffering, physical and or emotional, spiritual, and they reach out to others experiencing something similar, offering comfort and hope, walking alongside one another, praying for one another, being present to one another, sharing the grief of the death of a loved one, a spouse, a parent, a child, a friend, sharing the fear and anxiety of a recent cancer diagnosis, Parkinson's disease diagnosis, a heart attack, a stroke, sharing the heartbreak of watching your children hurt and struggle, little ones as well as adult ones. We are healed. We are restored for service, to serve each other, to heal each other. And it is amazing to witness and even more amazing to experience. And we who call ourselves the First Presbyterian Church in South St. Paul do it as well, if not better than most. But I want to challenge us this day to go further, to place our trust in God and one another even deeper. For there are still places in our lives, perhaps the darkest and most painful places in our lives, that need the most healing and that we fear sharing with one another. Places of addiction and mental illness and suicide. Places of domestic violence and sexual assault, sexual abuse and child abuse of any and every kind. All of these unspeakable and horrible, awful places are places that members of this congregation, me, you, us, have experienced and are experiencing. Our struggles from which we have been healed, are in the process of being healed, and are in need of healing. We must bring these issues into the light, these wounds into the open air, that we might serve, that we might be ministers of God's grace, healing and restoring ourselves, each other, and all of creation. Over the past 15 years, I have officiated at too many memorial services, both for our own members and beyond these walls, for a man whose alcoholism contributed to their death, For another whose depression was so severe, they thought the only choice they had was to take their own lives. A young girl who was sexually abused by a member of her family, and nobody believed her. In fact, was shamed by members of her family and eventually committed suicide. Too many stories, too many beautiful lives marked by shame and isolation that might be here today if someone who knew their pain had reached out to them. If we have learned anything over this past year in our culture, it is the danger of complicit silence, of hiding our eyes, turning our heads, and rationalizing that it, whatever it is someone else's responsibility and not our own. I cannot watch 170 young women testify in court of the abuse they suffered and endured, whose silence was encouraged, whose voices were ignored, who were not protected by those called to protect them, and not believe that things are broken, that they need to change, and that we must be that change. Especially those of us who know firsthand from our own lives the pain these young women have experienced and continue to experience. And not just young women, but maybe even more silently invisible, the abuse suffered by young men, whose reality is denied at every level, their masculinity called into question, and whose sense of suffering is considered culturally inappropriate. I'm not asking anyone to stand up now or fill out a form or call the office or privately tell a pastor of their private suffering or their willingness to participate in the healing of our brothers and sisters, though you could if you felt so called. But I do want us to begin the conversation, the difficult and painful conversations, because it is not just about us, just about you and me. It is about all our healing. The healing of our families, the healing of our communities, the healing of our nation and our world, the healing of all creation. And we are called to serve. Restored to healing ourselves, we are called to serve. Women and men, wounded and healed, we are called to serve one another as God serves us. And to God alone be all the glory. Amen.